The biggest lie, and from maybe the one the town has been telling its residents from the very beginning, that the monsters are the main enemy. Because if Season 4 has revealed anything, it is that the creatures may only be the visible layer of something much larger. The real system controlling Fromville does not simply want people dead. It wants them to believe the wrong story. And once you look at the town through that lens, some of the strangest events suddenly stop looking random. The bottle tree. The children's sacrifice. Julie's storywalking. Jade's visions. The man in yellow. Even the way certain people seem to be pulled toward the same events across different periods of time. But here's what changes everything. What if the monsters were never designed to make the residents escape? What if they were designed to make sure the residents never understand what the town actually is? For 4 seasons, the obvious explanation has been simple. The people arrive in the town. They cannot leave. At night, the creatures come out. They smile. They imitate human voices. They manipulate people's emotions. And when someone makes a mistake, they kill. So naturally, the residents have treated the monsters as the central problem. Find a way to kill them. Find a way to stop them. Find out where they come from. But look at what the show is actually telling us. Every time the characters get closer to understanding the structure of the town, the story changes. The monsters become less important. The questions become bigger. Because the real mystery isn't simply, who created the monsters? It is, why does this place need monsters at all? And that distinction is enormous. Season 4 makes this even harder to ignore. The story continues pushing characters toward revelations involving Jade, Tabitha, Boyd, Julie, and the strange forces surrounding Fromville. Instead of giving the characters one simple explanation, every discovery opens another layer of the mystery. The show is slowly moving away from ordinary survival horror and towards something much more disturbing, information horror. The terrifying thing isn't only what lives in the forest. It's what happens when you learn something you're not supposed to know. And this is where the theory gets darker. The town may not be trying to hide the monsters. It may be using the monsters to hide the rules. Think about how the residents behave. They wake up every morning thinking about survival. Food. Shelter. Talismans. Windows. Doors. Nightfall. Who is missing? Who is safe? Who might die next? Every day, their attention is consumed by immediate danger. And that is extremely convenient for whatever controls this place. Because a person who is terrified of being eaten doesn't have much time to ask why the road always brings them back. They don't have time to ask why certain symbols keep appearing. They don't have time to understand why children matter. They don't have time to ask why some people experience memories that seem older than their own lives. And they certainly don't have time to ask whether the town itself is reacting to their attempts to understand it. That's not the real mystery. The real mystery is why the town allows people to discover certain answers while apparently hiding others. And that is exactly where the monsters become suspicious. Look at the way the creatures operate. They don't simply attack. They communicate. They know names. They know personal information. They understand fear. They sometimes behave as though they already know what a person will do. And most importantly, they don't always seem interested in killing immediately. Sometimes they wait.
Sometimes they talk. Sometimes they tempt.
Sometimes they manipulate.
Why?
If their only purpose was extermination, this behavior would make little sense. But if their purpose is psychological control, everything changes. The monsters don't just destroy bodies. They destroy certainty. They create trauma. They create distrust. They force people into desperate decisions. And desperation is exactly what you would want if you were controlling a system designed around human choices. Because maybe Fromville doesn't simply feed on death. Maybe it feeds on the decisions people make when they believe they have no choice. And suddenly, the old events look different. Take Boyd. For years, Boyd has represented hope. He is the person who refuses to surrender. He keeps searching for answers even when everyone else wants safety. But what if that determination is exactly what the town needs? Because every time Boyd discovers something, the town gives him another problem. He finds the talismans, and the rules surrounding the creatures become more complicated. He discovers that the monsters can potentially be affected, and the situation changes again. He encounters the worms, and something even stranger begins. He finds himself confronting forces that don't behave according to ordinary physical rules. Now, the mystery surrounding Boyd is no longer simply whether he can survive. It becomes whether the town is using his determination against him. That's not coincidence. That's a pattern. The town doesn't simply stop people from finding answers. It changes the question. And Jade may be the clearest example. Jade believes information is the key. He sees symbols. He sees figures. He sees things other people cannot see. At first, these visions seem like meaningless hallucinations. Then they begin connecting to the town's history. Then the bottle tree becomes important. Then Jade and Tabitha are forced to confront revelations that appear to reach beyond their current lives. And suddenly Jade's greatest strength becomes his greatest weakness.
He needs to know.
He cannot stop looking. But what if the town knows that? What if the visions are not simply messages? What if they're bait? That possibility changes the meaning of every vision Jade has ever experienced. Because a perfect trap doesn't need to lie about everything. It only needs to tell you enough truth to make you believe the rest. This could explain one of the strangest features of From. The town gives answers, but the answers rarely bring peace. They create more questions. One mystery leads to another. One revelation opens another door. And just when the characters think they've found the underlying pattern, something deeper appears. That is not necessarily a failure to explain the mystery. It may actually be the point. Because if the town itself is a system designed to manipulate knowledge, then confusion is not a side effect. Confusion is the mechanism. And this is the detail everyone missed. The residents keep trying to escape physically, but the town may be trapping them psychologically first. That would explain why the supernatural elements are so deeply connected to memory, stories, symbols, dreams, and time. Julie's storywalking ability is especially important here because Julie doesn't merely travel through space. She can interact with events in the story itself. Think about what that means. If the town exists across multiple layers of time, then escaping the road may not be enough. The residents might be trapped inside a story that keeps repeating itself. And if that is true, then the monsters aren't the authors. They are characters. Dangerous characters. Powerful characters. But still characters inside a much larger structure. And somebody or something may be controlling the structure. Which brings us to the most disturbing possibility. Maybe the residents have been asking the wrong question for 4 seasons. They keep asking, how do we get out? But the town may be asking them a different question. What will you become before you get out? Because look at what Fromville does to people. It takes ordinary people and turns them into survivors. It takes survivors and turns them into investigators. It takes investigators and turns them into believers. And eventually, some of them begin behaving differently from the people who arrived. That's the real horror. The town may not need to keep you forever. It only needs to change you enough that when the exit finally appears, you are no longer the person who entered. And if that's true, then the biggest lie from isn't that the monsters are unstoppable. The biggest lie is that the monsters are the thing keeping everyone trapped. Maybe they're only the distraction. Maybe they're the guard dogs. And somewhere behind them is the real prison, a prison built around the story itself. And once the characters finally realize that, the question won't be how to kill the monsters. It will be much worse. Who is writing the next chapter? And this is where the theory becomes much more disturbing, because if the monsters are only the distraction, then we have to reconsider the moments when the town appears to give its residents exactly what they want. At first, these moments look like victories. A door opens. A vision appears. A mysterious person provides information. A supernatural ability develops. Someone discovers a new location. But look at the pattern. Every answer comes with a price, and every breakthrough seems to pull the characters deeper into the system rather than closer to freedom. That is not how a normal prison works. A normal prison keeps you away from information. Fromville may be doing something more sophisticated. It may be giving people information in carefully controlled pieces, because the wrong answer at the wrong time could be more dangerous than no answer at all. This changes the meaning of the visions. For most of the story, visions have been treated as clues. Jade sees something, so he searches for its meaning. Tabitha experiences something, so she tries to understand what it is telling her. Other characters encounter impossible images, voices, memories, or supernatural events, and the immediate assumption is that these things are pointing toward an escape route. But what if we have been making the same mistake as the characters? What if a vision is not necessarily a message from the truth? What if it is a message designed to make someone move? Because the difference is enormous. A genuine clue gives you information. A manipulation gives you information and then controls what you do with it. And Fromville has repeatedly demonstrated that it can influence people's decisions without physically forcing them. That is why Jade becomes so important to this theory. Jade is dangerous to the town because he doesn't accept the obvious explanation. He keeps connecting things that other people separate. Symbols.
History. Time. Death.
Repetition. The strange objects scattered around Fromville. He is essentially trying to reconstruct the architecture of the mystery. But the more he understands, the stranger his experiences become. That creates a terrifying possibility. Perhaps the town doesn't attack its smartest investigators directly, because it doesn't need to. It simply gives them more information. It lets their own obsession consume them. Jade's mind becomes a battlefield where every new discovery creates another question. And eventually, the investigator can become trapped inside the investigation itself. But here's what changes everything. This may be exactly what happened to the people who came before them. We tend to look at the older mysteries as separate pieces of Fromville's mythology. The children, the strange rituals, the previous inhabitants, the repeated symbols, the different versions of the same story. But what if these aren't separate mysteries? What if they are remnants of the same process?
People arrive.
They experience the town. They begin searching for answers. They discover something. They attempt to change the rules. And then the system adapts. If that cycle has happened before, then the current residents aren't the first people trying to solve Fromville. They are simply the newest participants. And this is where the idea of repetition becomes terrifying. Because From has never treated time as something completely reliable. Characters experience things connected to periods they should never have access to. Memories and visions appear without obvious explanations. Julie's connection to storywalking makes the relationship between past, present, and future even more complicated. If events can somehow be observed or influenced across different points in time, then the town doesn't need to physically rebuild itself every time someone discovers something. It can simply allow the same psychological pattern to happen again.
The people change. The names change. The details change.
But the story remains. That could also explain why the town seems obsessed with stories. Not just literal stories, but narratives. People are constantly trying to understand what their experience means. They want to know who is good, who is evil, who can be trusted, who is responsible, and what they're supposed to do next. But a narrative gives chaos a shape. And if something controls the narrative, it can influence how people interpret reality. Imagine two identical events happening to two different people. One person believes it is a warning. Another believes it is an invitation. A third believes it is punishment. The event itself hasn't changed. The meaning has. And in Fromville, meaning appears to have power. That makes the boy in white far more complicated than simply being a mysterious supernatural guide. For years, the natural assumption has been that because he helps certain characters, he must ultimately be on their side. But that's exactly the kind of assumption the town could exploit. Helping someone does not automatically mean you are helping them escape. A person can lead you toward the truth, while still leading you deeper into the trap. A guide can be genuine and still be part of the system. And if the boy in white understands the rules better than anyone else, then the question isn't simply whether he is good or evil. The question is, what does he want the characters to become? That question becomes even more important when we consider the children. The children have never functioned like ordinary victims in this story. Their existence is connected to some of the deepest layers of Fromville's mythology. They represent innocence, sacrifice, memory, and the possibility that something happened long before the current residents arrived. But perhaps their importance isn't simply that they were victims. Perhaps they are evidence that the system requires belief. Children are uniquely vulnerable to stories because they accept rules before they understand where those rules came from. If someone tells a child that something is true, the child doesn't need decades of evidence to accept it. And if Fromville was built around a belief, ritual, or story, then the children's role may reveal the original mechanism behind the entire nightmare. That's why the sacrifice theory matters so much. If something powerful was created through an act of sacrifice, then the monsters may not be the original source of the horror. They may be the consequence, the visible result of an older bargain. And if that bargain was based on a desire, perhaps the desire to escape death, defeat time, or obtain something impossible, then the town could be continuing to enforce the terms of that bargain long after the original people are gone. The monsters would then become less like independent predators and more like guardians of an ancient contract. But here's the darker possibility. What if the contract isn't about keeping people inside? What if it is about keeping the story alive? Think about what happens whenever someone dies in Fromville. Their death doesn't always feel like the end of their importance. Their actions leave behind memories. Objects remain. Information survives. Other characters inherit their fears and unfinished questions. Their death becomes part of the mythology. In a normal horror story, killing a character removes them from the game. In From, death often seems to add something to the mystery. The dead become clues. Their choices become warnings. Their experiences influence the people who remain. In other words, the system gets stronger every time another person becomes part of the story. And if that is intentional, then the town doesn't necessarily need an infinite supply of people. It needs people who will continue the narrative. Someone discovers something. Someone else interprets it. Another person acts on that interpretation. Someone dies because of the decision. The survivors learn from the death. They change their behavior. Then the system responds again. It becomes a self-sustaining cycle. The town doesn't have to control every individual decision. It only has to create the conditions that produce predictable human reactions. That is why fear may not actually be the town's greatest weapon. Hope might be. Fear makes people hide. Hope makes them take risks. Fear makes people obey rules. Hope makes them break them. Fear makes someone stay inside the house. Hope makes them enter the forest looking for answers. And every time someone believes they have finally found a way out, they move deeper into the mystery. That's not the real mystery. The real mystery is why the town keeps allowing hope to survive. Because if the goal were simply to kill everyone, hope would be unnecessary.